ESPN NFL analyst and former NFL QB Dan Orlovsky joining us. His segment brought to you by Ellicott Hotels. Fans, round up your family, friends, and coworkers for a fantastic game day experience at 500 Pearl. Reserve your pack, book your group event today at 500pearlbuffalo.com. All right, Dan. Well, for Bills fans, it's an end of the road again in the divisional round. And, you know, Steve and I have been acting as therapists for the better part of the last couple of days. And it's very hard for fans to come around to there were execution issues that compromised the Bills' chances of winning this football game. There was also some personnel availability issues that didn't help either on the defensive side of the ball. But they're like, they got no explosive plays. I mean, how can you play this kind of football and expect to beat the Chiefs? And I'm saying to them, there were 3 explosive plays to be made, and the receiver dropped the ball all 3 times. It's a different game if 1 or 2 of those are caught.
Yeah, I feel for Bills fans. I've become a huge fan of obviously the organization, Bills Mafia, Josh. And so you watch that game and how it ends. You prefer to lose 35-10 and just get whooped and get beat and say, hey, we weren't good enough. But for it to end that way, I'm sure is brutal and bitter. You know, when you sit there and you watch the I had a lot of people yesterday. Obviously, I was on TV all day yesterday trying to fight the good fight when it came to some certain stuff. And I had multiple people say, well, you know, Josh completed 16 passes at or behind the line of scrimmage and only 10 for 20 downfield. That's not good. And it's a learning moment for that. My job is to educate. 3 drops. You know, one of those 3 drops swings the game. 2 of them, specifically the one to Sherfield on 3rd down, swings it a lot because it's points. And then obviously Steph's is massive. So there's points there attached to it. 2, the reason why those stats are the way they are is Kansas City came into this game. They played a ton of man coverage and they wanted to get in your face and come after you. They didn't do that against Buffalo. They played a ton of zone. They played a ton of 2 high shell. That's not surprising to anybody. And so to sit there and be frustrated with the lack of explosive plays when a defense plays a certain way to you and you've begged the quarterback to play a certain way against that defense, he then does, both he and the play caller, and we try to hold that against him. That's just not how real life works. So, you know, part of the lack of explosive plays was Kansas City was just adamant and hell-bent on not allowing them. And then obviously those drops. So, you know, in the context of how did you have to play that game, both as a play caller and a quarterback, it was pretty stinking good and darn near flawless. And so, yeah, I mean, it's the drops were huge. I said this yesterday, Chris, the difference of the game, one team's guys made plays down the field, one team's guys didn't.
Right.
That's just the truth.
What do you say then? Also, there's always the particularly in a situation where the Bills find themselves where they've gotten to the same level of the playoffs for 3 years after going to the AFC Championship game 4 years ago. Now they were kind of stuck at the divisional round, and they've lost twice to Kansas City, lost once to Cincinnati, and now it's starting to look like this is a coach that can't get us over the hump. This is a coach and this is a staff that just doesn't know how to win that big one. At the end of that game, I saw a very different Sean McDermott making coaching decisions than we did 3 years ago in the 13-second game where they played so their players wouldn't make a mistake. And yesterday, I thought they played aggressive in those situations by going down the field. They did, trying the fake punt when they did, going for it on 4th down in their own end. I thought they did everything to put the game in the hands of their players and say, listen, you guys can win this. Let's go.
Yeah, I completely agree. A lot of people have made a big deal about the fake punt. That is the age-old sports thing. If it works, you're the smartest person in the world. And we praise Dan Campbell for it. Dan Campbell does it a ton. We praise him. But now, whether the design of the play is, I'm not a special teams, ace, so I have no idea to comment on that. But I had no issue with it. If it works, you're the smartest coach in the world, and you got the biggest guts in the world. And if it doesn't, hey, defense, bail me out. Jordan Poyer obviously does. So, again, yesterday, there was the idea of, Bill Belichick there. And I was just like, Dude, Sean McDermott coached his rear end off this year. Everybody knows what the injury issues that were a part of this season and the decision to move on from Ken Dorsey to Joe. And, that's a roll of the dice and get this team to where they are. I just don't view it the same way as the people saying, well, he's gotten us to a point. I understand the context of it and some of the comparisons that people have made. I can only go off what I watched this year, and I think he coached his rear end off. Now, do I think he's immune to, like I talked about it a lot this season. It obviously was a huge part of this game with Taron. I want to be very clear, Taron Johnson's outstanding. He's a tremendous nickelback, but their commitment to playing nickel all the time, it hurt them again. And I think that is something, if you want me to be honest about, like, hey, what can they do different? I do think that has to be a part of their offseason conversation of like, hey, like at some point we got to be willing to match personnels on defense. And maybe that means taking this player off the field for a certain time. So I do think that's a place where we could be critical of McDermott, but I thought they went to go win the game. And, unfortunately, a player here or there, a kick here or there doesn't allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're referencing how Chiefs went into 13 personnel there, and sometimes the Bills didn't put the third linebacker on the field and kept Taron out there, and it was a problem at times in the game. I want to get your thoughts, Dan, on the job turned in by Joe Brady. It's never easy when you have to take over as a coordinator mid-season, and Brandon Beane, who addressed the media today, mentioned this as well, because you can't really tweak it and put your own stamp on it midway through the season. It's more of a triage situation on offense, and I kind of felt like that's what it looked like the rest of the way. So the fact that they won 6 out of their last 7 after Brady took over and then won a playoff game on top of that, just your thoughts about the functionality of the offense, knowing the situation under which Joe Brady found himself.
Spectacular. I remember, being on with you guys, and maybe they were 5-6 and 6-6, and you asked me like, hey, can they get to the playoffs? And I don't know what I said. I don't know if I said yes or no. I said, I know this. If they do, it'll have to be the best stretch of quarterback play of Josh's life. And I think you can make the case that, performance-wise, it got up there. I don't know if he was as hot as some of his runs he's had, but then you saw the growth of the offense. You saw this offensive line become a strength. You saw James Cook kind of become a focal point. You saw Shakir become a massive piece. Obviously, the development of the 2 tight ends are big parts of that as well. And so I think if I'm sitting here 4 days removed or 3 days removed, 2 days removed, whatever it is, and what's the focal point for the Bills this offseason? And which is outrageous question, I guess, in and of itself. But I think you start with, can you keep Joe Brady? Like, can you keep Joe Brady? Because there's no way that you watch that last 6 or 7 games and you say, hey, our offense didn't perform better and more efficient in the midst of chaos. And then I think number 2 question becomes, and I know it's sensitive, what's going on in the wide receiver room? What do they view Stephon Diggs as? And both in production and pay. And then what is their view or plan with Gabe Davis? I think that's the number one thing they have to move forward to, because Gabe not being there was a big deal. I don't know exactly what has transpired with Steph when it comes to his ability to go be that guy. What the attempts were there. I don't know if the production was as dominant as it has been in the past. And I think that's kind of where they have to start.
Right, and I would agree with you, and we've been talking about what's going to happen. Certainly, you've got to have somebody lined up in Gabe Davis's spot. I don't think that person's probably on the roster at this point. If you count Gabe as not being on the roster as well, I mean, there's always a chance that he comes back like Jordan Poyer did at a team-friendly deal where the free agent market isn't what we thought it was going to be, and he ends up coming back. Who knows? But there's no question they need to be more productive on a consistent basis at the number 2 wide receiver. If Steph's the number 1, the number 2 guy, because there were too many games where Gabe Davis had 0 targets and 0 catches, and there was multiple. There's a handful of games like that. You can't live like that.
No, not in that conference. I know that, not
Right.
not in that conference when you got, freakazoids at quarterback on a week to week basis, and you're going to see them come playoff football time. And so, yeah, I think that's just that their biggest like focal point plan specifically in offense is, how are they going to treat it and how are they going to attack it? And you gotta, there's also positives though, like I don't want to turn this into a bash the wide receiver or, doom and gloom wide receiver group, but Shakir's development, you got to sit there and go, man, we got a really good slot player. And then obviously Dalton was great. And not Dawson is as reliable as you can get at that tight end spot. So there's a lot of really good at the pass catching group. But I do think, you have to be candid and reassess where it is and where it has to get to.
Yeah, because Brandon Beane, who spoke to the media today, was asked about Steph specifically. Now, what can he say publicly? He said Steph is still a number one receiver in their eyes, and he also added that they have to put weapons out there to keep teams from bracketing him and locking him down, but he believes that Steph can still play. I'm of the belief, Dan, that with Gabe Davis being a free agent, them in a cap situation that doesn't lend the ability to go out and get a free agent receiver who's proven, you got to get two receivers on the first 2 days of the draft. One who is elite physical traits and an alpha dog who can assume the number one role by the time the leaves are off the trees next fall, because that is when Steph Diggs' production drops off precipitously. It's happened each of the last 2 years. So let Steph be your number one the first half of the year next season, and then when he tails off, this new alpha dog's ready to go, and then get me another burner who can stretch the field. You got to get two on the first 2 days of the draft, as I see it, to retool this offense and give Josh enough weapons where you do have the execution you need this time of year.
Yeah, I completely agree. We're actually talking about that specifically with Mel Kiper on NFL Live today because, this draft class at that spot is really good. And I know the high-end guys, the Rome Odunzes of the world, the Marvin Harrisons Jr., those aren't going to be in the conversation. So actually my specific question to Mel today is, hey, there's that group of teams that are going to be drafting like late teens and early to mid-20s. Give me the wide receiver in that group that is going to be in the conversation for like the Arizona, Buffalo, Kansas City that, you think is going to be drafted there that is actually be a better player than where he's going to be drafted just because of the way the draft falls or whatnot. So I'll be fascinated to see and hear who his answer is because I agree. Like, I think, if we take the viewpoint of the conference and we look at the quarterbacks and the people that they have, everyone's got their guys, plural, and I don't know, especially when Gabe went out, if that was the case. And so I agree, Chris, like, if they're going to still view Steph as that one, treat him as is, but you better get somebody that's ready to step in.
Yeah, I mean, I realize this is only one stat and you can't treat him in the vacuum, but in terms of catch rate, here's the breakdown of the receiving core player by player. Your top three catch rate players on the Bills this year, Shakir, 86.7. He was sixth in the entire league. Cook, 81.5. We realize a lot of higher percentage throws for backs. Okay, take it with a grain of salt. Kincaid, 80.2. Those guys are all in the top 25 of the entire NFL. Diggs, I know, higher volume. You're going to have more drops. But 66.9 for your number one receiver, that's his catch rate. And then Gabe Davis, 55.6, 177th in the league. That can't be your number two receiver.
Yeah, I totally agree. We're actually doing something again on NFL Live today. And, again, our job is to be really critical. I still, Steph is awesome. He's awesome. But if you look at like this back stretch and just compare him and Shakir, it's like I think they have relatively similar targets, but Shakir's got more yards, he's got more touchdowns, he's caught the ball better, he's got more bigger plays. And so like you have to watch the tape, and the tape kind of lends itself to have a thought. And then when the number matches, then you have a relatively good group of information to go, well, what do we do with this? And first of all, why is it that way? Why is it because the player has dropped off? Is it because the system didn't allow it? Was it because our style of offense? Is the quarterback at fault? And then where do we go from here? I think those are really big questions for them. I do.
Yeah, you talk about it. I know the stat line you're talking about. Steph Diggs and Shakir in the last 10 games, they've got identical yardage and identical catches, and Shakir has 37 targets.
Diggs has 80.
Maybe he has 47 targets.
Shakir had 40 more receiving yards than him.
So Shakir, just because of the efficiency of his catch rate. I got to ask you this too. On a more general note. So you're looking at a conference that's got Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow coming back. Now they've got C.J. Stroud, who we kind of know something about. Trevor Lawrence, who's taken a step back this year, but we'll see. Will Levis has stepped up, and Tennessee's going to roll with this guy, and he's got some physical capabilities. Anthony Richardson will be coming back. Deshaun Watson, and, of course, the last guy that I'm mentioning is Aaron Rodgers, by the way. Right? So this AFC conference, dude, I mean.
Murder is real, man.
Yeah. But let's face it, the last guys standing, the last four guys standing are Josh Allen, C.J. Stroud, Pat Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson. And they're all playing at a really high level. I mean, there is not a weakness in any of their games. And standing on the outside looking in is, Joe Burrow. He's going to come back and be there. I mean, that's 5 of the 7 possible play. You know what I mean? I mean, there's no room at the top of the AFC unless you've got a guy. I mean, even these, a
special guy.
Yeah, a special guy. They're not just guys; they're special guys.
Yeah.
What can you generalize? What can you generalize about that? I mean, if anything,
it's if you don't have one, you don't have a chance. If you don't have, you might play a bunch of games in September and October. No, you don't have a shot. And I think, obviously, I was wildly passionate yesterday. I feel like I have been for a while now. And that's why I get so frustrated with, well, this player can't do this or whatnot. And I take a lot of pride in trying to educate and analyze and being honest about it. And I'm just like, we have no idea how good you have to be to even have a chance, to have a shot. And Buffalo is one of 4 or 5. I mean, even some of the guys you named, Steve, they don't really. They need to catch the break.
Right.
Buffalo has a human being who plays quarterback that not only wants to but can, and that's why sometimes some of the conversation around the dude. I've met Josh once. Everyone thinks that we're best friends. I met him once. I'm just doing my job as good as I can. Buffalo has a quarterback that can stand face to face with the best player in the league and beat him. Now, his team hasn't done it when it's mattered the most, but it hasn't been because the guy's crapped down his leg. It's just because he didn't catch the break. That's it. And so the conference is loaded. That being said, Buffalo is going to go in at that position to the 2024 season. And if you had the biggest hater on the planet and the guy that was most anti-Josh Allen, he would say they're the 3rd best at that position in the conference, at worst.
Yeah, it's something. I know you tweeted out his 63-yard rope on a dime to Diggs. I mean, he just catches that ball. It could be a different football game. It's crazy.
Yeah,
I mean,
all-time great throw, man.
Unbelievable stuff. Dan, you've been unbelievable all season long as well. Thanks for all the insight. You've been a fantastic addition to the show. We've gotten a lot of great feedback on our social media channels for the insight you add. So thanks very much for all that you've given us on the football side of the ledger this season. We really appreciate it.
No, it was an honor. You guys are great, good people. You guys talk ball as good as anybody. So as much as it was, enjoyable for you, equally for me. So I'm thankful.
All right,
Dan.
Hopefully you get some downtime after the Super Bowl. Enjoy the offseason, man.
Guys.